Alright, so I'm going to do a short video on the fortifications for the Sisters of Battle, just using the ones that are in the core book, though there are some new ones coming out, and we'll talk about those separately maybe in a later video, depending on how good they are. Fortifications were something that were in Warhammer back in previous editions, but they weren't in 5th edition. I think it was 2nd or 3rd edition when they had some fortifications, but they're not what they are now. And just running through which ones I've had personal experience with and think that are really useful for sisters, and which ones you might pass on, and what you would use them for. So the one that pretty much everyone probably takes for their army, because it works for almost every army out there, would be the Aegis defense line. And the Aegis line is just a bunch of these little barricades. It's a cheap 50-point fortification, but I don't think anyone pays 50 points for it because they take one of the add-ons. So what does it do? It gives you walls, and these walls give you a cover save as if you're standing in ruins. So they give you a 4-up cover save. They also let you go to ground behind them and get a +2 to your cover save, so they would give you a 2-up cover save if you go to ground. So that in itself is pretty nice, because while all the wall sections have to be connected, you could string this around objectives or such when you're setting up your game, or put it in an area that you really want to have a lot of sisters that aren't gonna die easily, because they could go to ground behind it and get a phenomenal saves. So it's a great fortification just for that. It also has the ability to take add-ons, and the Aegis line gets 3 add-ons. It can take a comm relay, a gun emplacement with the las cannon, that's actually the one I've got right here, and it could take a quad gun. So let's just run through what they do, and whether I think it's useful. So comm relay. This is useful in that if anyone is within 2 inches of it, any model within 2 inches of it lets that player re-roll for reserves. Now, if I was taking an Aegis line and I had only 1 fortification, unless I was using a heavy Air Force list or had a lot of reserves for some reason, I don't think the comm relay is great. But depending on your allies, if you have guard and you're going to bring in 3 vendettas, and that's really important to you, even though they can only be 3 vendettas in one squadron, or if you have a whole bunch of dominions that you really need to outflank, and that's more important to you than being able to shoot down flyers, then the comm relay has its uses. And in some armies with some allies in particular, and allies are part of 6th edition, they're not going to go away, the comm relay is really useful. But it's probably the least useful for the sisters, in my experience. The next one is the Icarus las cannon. So Icarus las cannon here is basically a las cannon. It's a gun emplacement las cannon. It costs 35 points, so it's not cheap, but it has interceptor and skyfire. So it's a typical las cannon, strength 9, AP 2, which is something sisters do not have. They can't buy any strength 9 weapons on their own. So this, on a pure sisters army, you can take one of these, or if you have 2,000 points, you could take 2 of them, 2 Aegis lines. It's got interceptor, so anytime anyone comes in from reserves, you could shoot at them. Now you can only do that once with this, but it lets you do that. It lets you shoot at flyers. It has skyfire, so you can shoot a flyer the round it comes in at the end of movement. Not when it shoots, but at the end of movement, this thing can shoot. Now, it only gets 1 shot, so you really make sure it counts. And I'll talk about that in a second. But now, it is important to note that because it shoots at the end of movement, if your opponent has a bombing run, they could potentially blow up the Icarus las cannon or kill the girl next to it and prevent it from being shot during their movement phase, because bombs are dropped during movement. Okay, so las cannon, this is actually my preferred weapon for the sisters, because the quad gun, while it puts off more shots, at least at high point games, I'd rather have some las cannons. The quad gun, at lower point games, or if you know you're going up against a lot of flyers, this is a great weapon. So it's going to shoot 4 twin-linked Skyfire Interceptor Strength 7 AP4 shots. So it can take down pretty much any flyer. And so it's a great weapon. It murders infantry. It shoots down monstrous creatures. You know, it's good for that. Now, sisters do have the ability to shoot a lot of Strength 8 AP1 shots out of things like Exorcists. So the quad cannon isn't necessarily awesome in that respect, but it is a good weapon. It's 50 points, so it's quite reasonable. One of the things to note with these two guns, but not the comm relay, is that they have a stat line there: toughness 7, 2 wound, 3+ save. Now, if they're behind the Aegis line, you could argue that they get pretty good cover, particularly the las cannon gets good cover and it could take its cover save. But they can be destroyed. They also can't shoot on their own. They need to have a model in base contact with them to fire them. And it is possible, and even quite likely in some games, that say you're going up against something like Dark Eldar, where they've got lots of really fast units that can fly over and land on your side. You could have your opponent take your, land, boom, next to your quad gun and then start shooting it, and may even shoot at your own units that come in from reserve. So that's important to know. So as long as there's a model in base contact, they can shoot the gun. Comm relay basically says any player with an unengaged model within 2 inches. So if you have a comm relay and your opponent's on the other side, you both benefit from the comm relay. And it can't be killed short of something that obliterates terrain, and you don't see that in the in the basic game rules. So Aegis line, I think pretty much everyone who's playing 40k 6th edition knows that Aegis lines are useful for almost every army. And there's one downside that has to be considered. If you're playing Sisters and you have the Archconfessor or Saint Celestine or some other fearless character attached to your sister squad that's behind the line, you cannot go to ground, because fearless units can't go to ground, so you don't benefit from the 2+ cover save from going to ground behind the Aegis line. Okay. I didn't bring in some of the other terrain. Skyshield landing pads. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, sort of a pointless fortification for 75 points. But that's not entirely true. On reconsidering and seeing it work, you could take one of these. If you take it with the pad at 75 points, it's a big pie plate. However, it's pretty useful in some situations, because when it has its shielded sides up, the Skyshield is something where you could park a couple Exorcists on top and give them a 4+ invulnerable save, which is better than the save they would get from their Shield of Faith. And so the Skyshield lets you put a unit sitting out right in the open and give them a 4+ save, and they can shoot from it with no problems. And it also lets some deep striking units come in, but I don't think that's as useful for the Sisters. Then the next fortification in the book would be the Imperial Bastion. So 75 points. Base, it's a building. It's kind of like an immobilized Land Raider. It has armor value 14 all around it. You can put a whole squad inside it, and you can put a squad on top. And what it comes with base is it's going to have heavy bolters, 4 heavy bolters shooting out of it. And these will shoot whether there's people inside the building or not. They'll auto fire if there's no one in there. Otherwise, the people in the building can shoot it. And then on top, you could put a comm relay, Icarus las cannon, or the quad gun. Exactly the same benefits as with the Aegis line. People have asked me about this, and I've tried this. The Imperial Bastion, because it has heavy bolters, you could put a squad of Retributors inside it, or Dominions, or something that's going to get a real benefit. Even Seraphim, who are going to get a benefit from their act of faith on the heavy bolters in the building. And on paper, it seems good. You're going to get those heavy bolters sort of for free. You know, you paid 75 points for the bastion, and then they shoot just like normal. So that looks good on paper. Unfortunately, at best, usually two, but sometimes only one of them is actually facing your opponent. So there's four of them on the building, but they have a limited range of fire. And so, yeah, you can put girls in there like a Retributor squad and you get free heavy bolters. But I actually think point-wise it's better to buy a Retributor squad. 75 points for the bastion with the bolters, or you could get the Retributors for pretty much close to the same price with heavy bolters. And they can move around and they could all shoot at their opponent. Now, they do get better protection inside the building, but you know, in actual experience, the Imperial Bastion as a free set of bolters is really not paid off. It is a good, hard to destroy object, but you know, one good melt a hit to it is, and it can blow up just like any other vehicle, and basically a fortification is a vehicle that can't move. The Fortress of Redemption, it's worth noting that the guys on top are not fearless, or the girls on top are not fearless. So if they make a morale check and fail, they'll jump off the bastion and probably die. Now this is a neat one. It's 220 points. I've only seen it used twice. I've not used it myself. It takes up a whole table corner. It's huge. It has multiple buildings, different bunkers, and different weapon mounts on it. And it lets you take different missile launchers, frag and crack storm missiles, and the Icarus las cannon and heavy bolters. And you know, I think for this, if you're going to take it, it might actually. It certainly has a how would you say effect on the way your opponent plays against you, because when this thing is sitting out there, it really draws all the attention to it. And if you put it in the right place, you can put objectives behind it, so that it makes it very difficult for your opponent, unless they have flying units, to even get to an objective. You know, units inside this thing inside the fortress are fearless, so I think in some ways, if you take the Fortress of Redemption, you might be able to skip taking some of the... you certainly could probably skip taking allies, because it lets you hold a whole table corner and sort of focused fire against it for the whole game. Your opponent's probably going to have a hard time destroying the whole friggin' fortress. And it comes with some pretty good weapon upgrades, so you know, it's neat. I have only seen it used a couple times, and actually both times the person playing against the fortress complained so much about the fortress in play that it must be a really good item, even though it's 220 points. So I'd love to see what other people get with it, and I've thought about buying it, but it also feels kind of annoying to carry this thing into a game store, because it's the size of an entire army case. Okay, a few other things to think about, just special rules. Aegis defense lines, unlike the rest of the fortifications, can't be destroyed because they don't have hull points. They don't have an armor value. They're actually pieces of terrain. So unless you played an apocalypse game with vortex grenades that destroy terrain or something like that, these things are staying. When shooting these weapons, sisters benefit from their acts of faith. So battle sisters don't really benefit when shooting the quad gun, because the quad gun's twin-linked anyways. And you can't twin-link a twin-linked weapon, but they do let you reroll ones when shooting the las cannon. Retributors make this potentially rending, and so that's amazing, but they don't help much with the las cannon because it's rending. What difference does it make? Dominions are going to be able to twin-link the las cannon, but not the quad gun, because it's already twin-linked. Seraphim, with their ability to reroll wounds with their shooting attacks, you know, either one of these weapons is pretty nice with them. Now, other squads, you can actually take Repentia. Let's say you're starting the game on your own deployment zone. Repentia can shoot these weapons. They have a ballistic skill of 4, so they're solid as any other sisters unit when shooting them. Or if you take any of these special upgrade, special characters, Uriah or Saint Celestine or the Archconfessor all have ballistic skills which are 5 or better. St. Celestine's ballistic skill 7, so she gets to reroll misses with this las cannon, and the other guys are going to only miss on 1s with the quad gun, and since it's twin linked, they're going to only miss on a double 1. So they are really effective at shooting these weapons, and since they benefit from the active faith of their squad, they are exceptionally good with them. So personal experience, I really like using the Aegis line and the quad cannon with a Retributor squad at low points, because this can kill an awful lot of things, and at higher points where you're often going up against things with really high armor values or super high toughness and armor 2, then the las cannon seems to be much more effective, because sisters are las cannon weak. They don't have any strength 9 weapons of their own, so that's my personal experience, is that the quad cannon's not as useful at high points, because the Retributors tend to die with it, but Uriah shooting this thing, or the Archconfessor shooting it, is pretty nice. That's the summary of fortifications that are in the book. Aegis line, I think it's almost a no-brainer for most armies. The Skyshield could be useful. I don't think it outcompetes the Aegis line for the sisters. The Imperial bastion is okay, but it's less useful, I think, than the Aegis line. And then the Fortress of Redemption is awe-inspiring when you see someone use it. It sort of says something. It's 220 points, so it's a big chunk of army, but it has a lot of use. So I think it's of some use, and certainly will demoralize your opponent. It causes lots of complaints, and that's the review.